The appearance of the Brazilian compound armour-protected ironclad Riachuelo in the 1880s led to something of a panic in the USA, when it was realised that only a handful of American Civil War-era monitors and a couple of the USN's carefully managed refits stood between a potential hostile power and the US coast. Whilst this revival would eventually lead to the all-new Steel Fleet and the start of the modern United States Navy, a couple of the first products of the rush to build new ships were somewhat less recognisable, as American designers tried to catch up on 2 decades of capital ship design. These 2 vessels were the USS Maine, which we'll talk about another time, and today's subject, the first USS Texas. Compared to the Maine, the Texas was actually slightly smaller, but somewhat more creditable as a small battleship, since Congress was enthusiastic about defending the US coastline, but not that enthusiastic. The displacement of both ships would be limited. Texas clocking in at just over 6,300 tons normal displacement, which was less than half the displacement of the contemporary Royal Sovereign-class battleships of the Royal Navy. The resulting lack of deck space meant that the main gun turrets had to be restricted to single 12-inch units, since sticking one fore and one aft would thus only give a single gun available in a chase or if the ship was being chased. It was decided to instead place the turrets en echelon on sponsons, the portside turret being the more forward of the 2. In theory, this meant that both guns could be brought to bear in almost all arcs, but the annoying necessity of things like funnels, masts, a bridge, and various other bits of superstructure meant that the actual firing arcs were very limited, even with the superstructure reduced to a flying deck supported by 3 small stanchions. In practice, the arcs were still further reduced by the fact that this superstructure was not designed to deal with the blast of 12-inch guns, which meant that unless you wanted to risk bringing down the bridge yourself, the ship was limited to a single gun per broadside except in near-perpendicular conditions, and it had a theoretical ability to fire fore and aft as long as you didn't mind an extensive repair bill afterwards. Complementing this were 4 casement-mounted 6-inch guns, 2 per side in single installations, and 2 open-mounted 6-inch guns placed fore and aft where you might otherwise have expected to find the main guns. 12 casemented 6-pounders for anti-torpedo boat work, and some high-mounted 1-pounders for further anti-torpedo boat and anti-personnel work completed the gun armament. The overall armament was rounded off by 4 single 14-inch above water hull-mounted torpedo tubes, 1 in each direction. As with the Maine and a number of other contemporary designs, she was also supposed to carry her own small torpedo boats, although externally rather than internally as found on some Italian ships, but this idea was abandoned when the first one they'd built for the Maine didn't work out very well. Armour, though, was quite good for such a small ship. A Harvey steel belt up to 12 inches thick, with 2 to 3 inches on the deck, and the turrets sitting on a diagonal structure that was half citadel, half barbette, and was also 12 inches thick, as were the turrets themselves. She would prove capable of almost 18 knots. A nice touch, since she was designed to only do 17. This speed was provided by just over 8,600 indicated horsepower, supplied from a pair of vertical triple expansion engines that drove 2 screws. Laid down in June 1889, launched 3 years later, and commissioned in August 1895, she almost immediately needed major structural reinforcement work, which was just as well as when she next went to sea, she went aground. So the structural reinforcements really earned their pay. And then she sank in port while she was under repair when a pipe in the engine room broke. Patched up again, she went aground again, this time while she was at anchor thanks to a strong wind driving her ashore. It seemed, though, that she had exhausted her allocation of bad luck, as when the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, she remained well free of any mudbanks and took an active part in both bombardments and the Battle of Santiago de Cuba, helping sink a number of Spanish ships. Post-war refits saw the loss of her final torpedo tubes in exchange for more armour and longer barrel 6-inch guns. But the rapid pace of naval advancement had left her far behind, and since she was nowhere close to a frontline unit, she was decommissioned in 1908 before being brought back as a harbour ship for Charleston. But by 1911, even this could have been done by other vessels, and so she was rigged for a live fire exercise. renamed the San Marcos so that her original name could be transferred to the then new dreadnought USS Texas, which of course is still around today. And then the San Marcos was sunk by the pre-dreadnought USS New Hampshire in shallow water, where the wreck would be used for a number of other live-fire trials until 1959, when what was left of the hull above the seabed was demolished with explosives.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.